Hey guys, this is Drakmyth and welcome to my Post-Mortem review for Dishonored. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention my usual disclaimer that this is not a spoiler-free review, since I'm assuming you just watched through the Let's Play. As always, if you guys have any thoughts or comments on this review or the game at all, feel free to post them below. I always enjoy reading your thoughts.
Corvo! Everyone says you did something good tonight.
Hey! I have some mixed feelings about the audio on this one. The music is good, but very forgettable, even more so than Darksiders. There, I could at least tell you which tracks I liked, even if I couldn't remember their tunes. Here, I honestly don't remember any of the music. It's not bad. I can tell you that it always fits the mood, and the transitions to and from the music are never jarring. But even if I think about some of the parts where the music was more prevalent, I can't think of what those tunes sounded like. The sound effects and voice acting helped compensate for this somewhat. The sound effects are fitting and well leveled, but the only one that really has any punch behind it is the sound of a gunshot. I suppose if I had to pick only one sound effect to sound strong, that would certainly be the one to choose, but none of the sound effects really stood out and made me say, wow, these sound effects are amazing. The voice acting is generally pretty good. There are a couple lines here and there that sound a bit forced, but by and large I think everyone did a good job. Having the guards mix and match lines in conversations was clever, as it kept their talking from getting too stale. But it led to a couple scenarios where what they said sounded kind of strange. One notable exception here was Brad Dourif's work as Piero. Now, I love Brad Dourif. I'm always excited to see him in something, and that stems from the first time I saw him back in Myst 3. There, he did a phenomenal job selling the part of Savidro so convincingly. Unfortunately, that quality did not shine through here.
There is something to you, isn't there? You went and spanked the High Overseer in his own house. I hope the tools I designed for you function to your satisfaction. The fact that I am standing here and talking to you affirms that this is true, in several ways.
All of Piero's lines felt extremely forced. The timing was strange, with pauses after every couple words, but no pauses between sentences. After a while, you kind of got used to it, and it just became the way he talks. But it was still pretty jarring when everyone else's voice work was so much cleaner. I give the audio a 6 out of 10.
I would rather put it into something else.
This is probably the sore spot for me. The story for this game isn't bad exactly, but it's certainly not award-winning. You are Corvo Attano, bodyguard to the Empress. You get framed for assassinating her and kidnapping her daughter. A group of rebels break you out of prison and work with you to rescue the princess and clear your name by overthrowing a corrupt government. After this is done, they try to have you killed so they can control the government themselves. So then you need to re-rescue the princess and restore her to the throne properly. I have two major issues with this story. The first is how shallow it is. The developer, Arcane Studios, put a ton of effort into creating the world and its history, as shown through the various books and papers scattered throughout the game. There is some seriously deep and interesting lore here, so the main storyline sounding like something a grade schooler came up with is extremely disappointing. You may notice I didn't mention the Outsider in that synopsis, and that's because he's really pretty irrelevant to the game. He's used as a plot device early on to explain teleporting ninja assassins, but otherwise only shows up to tell you things you already know. Now, I will grant this category an extra point because of him, since without him we wouldn't have had whales in space. But by and large, he was just pointless and annoying. The second issue I have with the story is its pacing. After the prologue, you've been in jail for 6 months. Then, in the space of 2 missions, or about 2 days, you've already wiped out 3 of the Lord Regent's underlings, which is about half of them, and saved Emily. 2 days after that, you've taken down an entire corrupt government. Now, I'm all for the overpowered one-man army protagonist, but are you honestly telling me that a guy who can take down an entire empire in 4 days couldn't break out of a rather shoddy prison in 6 months?
I guess you lost me there.
And even then he needed help? Also, why were there only like 6 guys between you and the Lord Regent? The pacing of the story was way too fast and shallow for my liking. Though honestly, I'm not sure I would change that.
Here we go.
I thought the game itself was exactly the right length, so any method of slowing down the story would make the game longer, and I would rather the game be the proper length, but move too quickly, than move at a decent pace but take far too long. I'll talk about this a little more in the gameplay section of the review. Overall, I give the story a 4 out of 10. The graphics in this game were pretty typical of modern games. The character models and animations were decently high quality, and the lighting in each scene worked well. There were only a couple of spots where I thought the game got too dark to see what was happening. I do have to say that the occasional cityscapes, when we saw them, were really gorgeous. My only real complaint here, and I consider it a minor one, is the texture quality. Overall, I thought the texture resolution was fine. There were just a couple spots where it looked like a paper or something was important, or was something that I needed to interact with, and it wasn't. But that appearance got me right up close to it, and in those scenarios, it just looked like a blurry, smeary mess. The most obvious example was in the entrance hall to the Office of the High Overseer. I give the graphics a 7 out of 10.
Oh god.
The controls in this game were respectable. I played this one with the keyboard and mouse, and I never really had any trouble with it. There were a couple spots where I was trying to blink up to a ledge or something, and it wasn't working because the angle was too tight, but by and large I thought the controls performed quite well. Using an ability wheel with quick slots wasn't particularly surprising, and worked well enough, but having to reach up to the number row to switch weapons seemed very difficult and awkward for some reason. Much more so than in other games that do the same thing. I was mostly spared from this awkwardness, however, due to my Razer Naga mouse, which has 12 buttons along the thumb side that I can map to the number row. This allowed me to switch to any weapon or ability that I had in my quick slots simply by shifting my thumb a little, and I absolutely loved that. It was easy and intuitive. I suppose this says more about the mouse I use than the game, but whatever. Being able to lean was a big boon to the stealth aspect of the game, because it allowed you to look around corners without being seen, which has traditionally been a big issue with this type of game. By using Q and E for leaning, rather than potions or interactions like most games, leaning felt easy and intuitive, which was surprising. I thought I would have an issue with my potions being on R and T, and action being on F, all of which are non-standard placements for these kinds of functions. But in practice, it really wasn't an issue. The only one which might have been was having mana potions on T. But since you auto-use mana potions whenever what you're trying to do requires more mana than you have, you never have to worry about hitting that non-standard button in the heat of battle. This non-standard layout of functions actually works extremely well, at least for this type of game, so I was very pleasantly surprised about that. This game also reintroduced, after an extremely long absence from most games, the double jump. Double jumps in 3D settings, especially first-person settings, have always been problematic. Many jumps rely on you getting the most height out of a double jump that you can, but that can be difficult to judge when you're fighting with a camera or you can't see your body. By making the double jump triggered by simply holding the spacebar instead of pressing it again while you're in the air, you're guaranteed to always get the maximum height out of it. It took a little getting used to, but after I did, I found it very preferable to hitting the spacebar twice. Since the double jump is an optional ability, none of the jumps in the game actually require it, so it only ever made things easier for you after you got used to it in the first place. I give the controls an 8 out of 10. For as disappointed as I am with the story of this game, that's how impressed I am with the gameplay. The levels are extremely well designed. Almost every objective can be approached from no less than 4 different directions. If you approach this game like any other, you'll probably only see one way forward, and there will be all kinds of guards, traps, and nastiness that way. You can do that if you really want to, but if you take a second and look around the area, you can find back alleys, sewer tunnels, rat vents, and suspicious ceiling ledges that will all lead you to the same place while bypassing all of that destruction and violence.
Alright.
This allows the game to be linear without feeling like it. It lets the player feel like they're being told to go from point A to point B, but are given the freedom of choosing their own path. First-person stealth games almost always suffer from poor controls and a lack of relevant information about the player's surroundings. You jump in a dumpster to hide from a passing guard, but how do you know if that guard has passed? You climb out of the dumpster, because peeking usually isn't an option, and come face to face with it. Every first-person stealth game I've played has this problem, and is one of the multiple reasons why I refuse to play Amnesia. Dishonored solves this problem by giving you the tools to move around quickly and see your surroundings. With dark vision, you can see exactly where all the guards are at all times, eliminating the issue of wondering if they've passed yet. If you're stuck in a tight spot, Blink can allow you to get behind the guy coming at you, or to teleport away to a ledge where you won't be seen. These are small tweaks to be sure, but they are extremely effective at resolving some of the long-standing issues with this genre. Things sometimes got a little dicey when you came face to face with a large group of guards, but that typically only happened if you screwed up, and if you were careful to stay in control of what you were doing, you can actually take down a surprising number of guards head-on before they get you. Having that kind of control in first-person melee combat was also surprising. I would argue that it was even better than Skyrim's melee combat. My only real complaint with the gameplay has to do with the pacing. This game is great. I very much enjoyed playing through it, but for the most part, gameplay-wise, I had seen everything there was to see within the first 2 or 3 missions. Everything that came after that was just varying layouts of the same stuff. As a result, it got a little stale after just a few hours.
Yeah, and how's that working out?
Now, a lot of people were complaining about the game being very short. I don't know that I agree with that. I completed the game in just over 15 hours. Granted, that's short compared to things like Darksiders and Skyrim, but I think it was long enough for the content it provided. As I was approaching the final showdown, I mentioned how I had pretty much had my fill of the game. Now, was it worth the $60 I paid for it? I don't know. $45? Definitely. $50? You're pushing it. $60 was probably a little too much for what's here, but I don't regret buying it either. Not every game is going to hold my attention for 200 plus hours, nor should they. And just because they don't, that doesn't mean that they're bad games. I give the gameplay an 8 out of 10. And that's it. That's all for Dishonored, which finished with a score of 6.6 out of 10. Now, you might be wondering about DLC. The first DLC, Dunwall City Trials, has already been released, and while I might play it, I don't really have any intention of recording it. My understanding is that it contains nothing but time trial challenges, and holds no story or mission content whatsoever. If they release more DLC that does have story or mission content, I'll leave it up to you. Leave a comment, let me know if you would like me to record more Dishonored featuring future DLC if there isn't. So, I want to thank you all for watching. Your views, comments, likes, and subscribes are all greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time.